I will now introduce Susan McGurk for the next talk. Susan McGurk is professor in the Department of Occupational Therapy in Boston. She is a psychologist and a neuropsychologist, and she has done a lot in the field of cognitive remediation and has developed several programs for patients with severe mental disorders. And she has several grants in the field. And now, Susan, we are listening to your talk.
So I wanted to thank Dr. Frank for the invitation to present today. And I'm going to talk about cognitive functioning as a predictor of response to cognitive remediation. So the aim we did publish a comprehensive study on this topic. And one of the reasons is because publications were somewhat inconsistent in identifying if cognition is a predictor of response to cognitive remediation. Some studies have found that lower cognitive functioning predicted greater benefits, whereas some studies found that higher cognitive functioning predicted greater benefits. But the majority of studies found very few cognitive predictors of response. And this is of interest because it helps inform who is the best candidate for cognitive programming. So the aim of the study is to evaluate cognitive functioning as a predictor of response to cognitive remediation in a large comprehensive data set. So what we did is combine 5 randomized controlled trials with one cognitive model, thinking skills for work, a cognitive remediation model, which is a standardized, comprehensive, multimodal cognitive remediation intervention. So because we are using this program and RCTs using it, I just wanted to say a few words about it so you know what the cognitive model is. So thinking skills for work involves computer cognitive practice, facilitation by a trained cognitive specialist who provides strategy coaching. We also teach self-management strategies like memory spots, using alarms, etc., to optimize functioning. And we integrate this cognitive program into vocational services because we include people who are looking for work but have not been successful in getting it. The thinking skills has multiple components. Following enrollment, we do a comprehensive assessment, including a cognitive assessment and a history of job functioning. We deliver computer cognitive training along with cognitive self-management strategies. And then the cognitive specialist provides consultation on the client's job search and provides job support consultation, meaning once the person gets a job, they consult on any job performance difficulties. Here we go, sorry. Okay, so which is really what we're looking at when we're evaluating baseline cognitive functioning as a predictor to response to cognitive training. Although self-management strategies have been shown to positively affect cognitive functioning. So the cognitive training component of thinking skills involves computer cognitive practice combined with strategy coaching and teaching self-management strategies. So the cognitive training component involves 24 lesson plans that are comprised. This is a highly structured aspect of thinking skills for work. So The client gets a curriculum that they follow that guides their practice. The cognitive specialist is providing strategy coaching. And as people move through the curriculum, they write down their performance scores, and then they get, which helps inform what kind of strategy they may need to improve their scores. So this practice covers 5 to 8 exercises in a 60 to 90 minute session. Occurs 2 to 3 times a week. So it's a fairly intensive cognitive training component of thinking skills. So as an example, this is an exercise involving planning. It's mazes, and people have to solve the maze. So they move the mouse in order to go from one side to the other and try to avoid dead ends. So in this maze, we pointed out how many errors the person has made, and it's quite a few. So there's a real problem with planning. And please note that the person took 134 seconds to complete it. So the errors add to time to completion. Following strategy coaching, people are much more efficient in their planning. So they learn how to look ahead, think ahead, and avoid making mistakes. And that also helps them solve the maze more quickly. So their speed diminishes significantly. So in this, so that's an example of some of the foundations of the cognitive practice. So what we did is combine 5 randomized trials, giving us a total of 300 participants. All of them getting some kind of vocational rehabilitation. Half of them are randomized to thinking skills for work. So all continue to receive usual care. The 5 studies use different, 3 of the studies use the same cognitive battery, 2 use the matrix. So we combine cognitive tests using normative values to make sure we had representation of tests of attention, working memory, verbal learning and memory, speed of processing, and executive functions. We conducted 3 multiple regression analyses predicting cognitive change, including site, treatment group, baseline cognition, and treatment group by baseline cognitive interaction. This is a table of the 5 studies. I won't try to do this today, but it's in the publication of this prediction study. We published it last year. Nicole Detour is the primary author. So the majority of people have schizophrenia and about average premorbid functioning, but a range of cognitive deficits to the program. So as I said, we made a composite cognitive measure by computing the mean T-scores across 7 cognitive domains. We evaluated low versus high cognition, and we chose 3 cutoff scores to dichotomize the composite scores. So I just want to say, I've gone on to the next slide. I'm not seeing that it's showing. Can you advance the slide 1? Thank you. Okay, here we are. Okay, so the 3 cutoff scores are low average cognitive impairment, which is a T-score of 40 or lower compared to people with a T-score above 40. Moderate impairment or worse, a T-score of 23 or less compared to a T-score of above 23. And severe impairment, a T-score of 19 or less compared to a T-score, people with T-scores of above 19. So all 3 regression models were significant. In the T-score less than 40, so 40 or less in the mild cognitive group, mild cognitive impairment or less. Neither the cognitive group nor the cognitive group by treatment interaction were significant. In the 2 regressions with the lower cutoffs, less than 23 and less than 19. The effects for baseline cognitive group, treatment group, and cognition by treatment interaction and site were significant. So what does it look like? So this is, we thought these were really interesting findings. So I'm on to the next slide, if you can forward that. So what we found is people who had mild cognitive impairment or less, 40 or less, T-score 40 or less, that's mild or below, compared to people who were 40 or above, had similar effects, cognitive effects in the programs. The treatment as usual, the sideline, our thinking skills for work. And I know it's hard to really appreciate this in this graph on the left, but these groups both improved equally, meaning people who had minimal cognitive impairment improved as much as people who had minimal cognitive and below. So those groups did not differ. And I'll come back to that point. Looking at the most severely impaired group, a T-score of 19 or less, this is severely impaired, and this is on a composite score, there was significant differential improvement. So what you can see is for people who have great cognitive impairment, they improve significantly more than people who had a T-score above 19. So the greatest improvements were found in people with the greatest impairment. Okay, so let me go on. So what we concluded from these data is that people in the Thinking Skills for Work program improved more than those who received usual care. And we found that across all 5 studies individually and in toto, with greater levels of cognitive impairment associated with significantly more improvement than those with less severe impairment. So it kind of answers the question, can people with significant cognitive impairment benefit? And the answer is, not only do they benefit significantly more than other groups with less impairment. This finding was replicated across 2 levels of cognitive impairment. I only showed you the severe graph. The moderate group is 23 or below. The same pattern was found. And this was unaffected by controlling for any demographic or diagnostic characteristic or severity of psychopathology. So this means that people in the moderate to severe T-score of 23 or below improve significantly more than people with T-scores above 23. So this suggests that outpatients, and all these studies were done in outpatient mental health agencies with relatively severe cognitive impairment, benefit from a standardized, relatively intensive, facilitated, that's very important, cognitive remediation program. Now I'm going to come back to the findings of the people with this minimal cognitive impairment. Again, when we compare people above a T-score of 40, which is low average impairment, with everybody else, their improvements not differ significantly. So that indicates that not having significant cognitive impairment is not a barrier to benefiting from cognitive remediation, meaning everybody benefits. So people should not be excluded who do not have notable cognitive problems. And often people who don't are still very interested in cognitive remediation, and it turns out they can benefit, meaning you can turn a minimal impairment into an average or above average cognitive functioning. So there's something in this programming for everybody. I do want to note that for people with minimal cognitive impairment, this group was somewhat, this statistical comparison was somewhat underpowered because very few people entered these studies with minimal cognitive impairment, meaning above a T-score of 40. So most people had greater impairment than that. But still, we had representation, at least from 23 enrollees, of people who did not have significant cognitive problems. So again, the findings indicate that people with greatest cognitive impairment for whom cognitive remediation programs were developed are the most likely to benefit from this intervention. And this really kind of adds to the literature that was inconsistent on this point. However, people with minimal cognitive impairment benefited as much as people with more than minimal cognitive impairment. Thus, people with severe mental illnesses with minimal cognitive impairment should not be excluded from cognitive remediation programming. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your talk, Susan. Are there any questions on the chat? No. So I will start with the question. If I well understood, you're talking about general cognitive impairment. Do you think that it could be different if you focus on some subdomains of cognition? Have you investigated that in your data?
Yeah, we felt we had the best power with a composite score.
Yeah.
So we our analyses focused on a composite score that included. I'm going to cut off my video to help my.
Oh yes, it's better.
To help my connection. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so it's a really good question, and that, of course, is of greatest interest to people. Well, what about specific cognitive domains? What might improve more? Many studies are not powered to be able to answer that question. We included all the major domains of interest: verbal learning and memory, attention, problem solving, planning. So we can only make conclusions based on overall cognition and not individual areas.
Maybe I have another question. You said that cognitive remediation was initially developed for people with severe cognitive impairment, and it works for these people. Do you think that the fact that people with lower impairment have lower benefits should lead us to develop other types of intervention or specific intervention for people with low impairments?
For people with greater impairments or less impairments?
For less impairment.
Oh, that yeah. So that's an interesting point. So I think I'm going to restate what you said. Hopefully, this is what you're getting at. So if you have people who are enrolled who really are functioning pretty much okay, but nevertheless are still interested in improving their cognition, as many people are, are there more, perhaps could they be getting a greater challenge in a specific program designed for people who are better off cognitively? I think that's what you're asking. And that's a question for research. I mean, I think ours is the first study that looked at a range of people, including those really without any impairment. And again, it was a small group. I will say that our cognitive program we use can become quite difficult. So some of our memory challenges include 20 words or lengthy stories. So we are able to challenge people by increasing the difficulty of the exercises. We use COGPAC, and that can be adjusted to be quite difficult. And we continue to increase the difficulty and complexity of the exercises. So I think that's how we managed to improve people's functioning who weren't significantly impaired in the beginning. Nevertheless, your point is well taken, and perhaps there would be even better programs to get more improvement in people who are not impaired to begin with.
Thank you very much, Susan. I don't know if there are another question. No. So, and the quality of the sound is a little bit poor, but yeah, but I'm really happy to have the opportunity to hear you and to share with you. And I hope the next time we will have the opportunity to see you in person in Paris or everywhere else. Thank you very much, Susan. And we will now move to the next speaker.